and this again is not unique to higher ed, it may be more exacerbated in higher ed, which is to say most organizations, the way they tell the story and what they do for the people that they serve is very different from how the individuals perceive the job to be done.
Welcome to Radical Cooperation. I'm Dr. Michael Horowitz, Chancellor of the Community Solution Education System. Well, higher ed leaders are under constant pressure to modernize in response to changing student needs and external shifts, particularly today. We use the term innovation and disruption a lot and often come up short in seeing real innovation and disruption in the sector. So I'm really excited today to have Michael Horn, who is an award-winning author, co-founder of the Christensen Institute, and educator at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Michael, you've spent many, many years thinking about education broadly, K-12 and higher ed. What are the issues that limit innovation and perhaps disruption when we approach higher education today?
Yeah, I mean, where do you start, obviously, on the challenges? It's been a turbulent few years where higher ed's been on the front page a lot, and it continues to get challenging. That said, I think I'm optimistic at the moment. I think that we're in a cycle where, yes, since at least 1965, higher ed has governed and grown in a period of abundance and growth and enrollment and so forth. And that's not the period we're in right now. It's a right sizing that we're about to enter. And I think that's an opportunity, right, to create real value, to sort of reset what institutions do for the constituencies that they are set up to serve. And I think we'll see some new forms of higher education come down the line as well that could be really helpful to sort of reinventing the sector. And yes, it's going to be painful in the short term for existing institutions, but I think that overall, I'm optimistic that it'll be a good period of growth that we can re-enter into.
That's great to hear. To me, it has a little bit of the feel of the late 2000s, which was a very tough time nationally and in higher ed, yet it did spawn opportunity. And I'm especially interested to talk to you about those things that we can control within higher ed, right? Because it's too, well, it's simpler to say it's the government, it's external forces, but we have a lot to answer for in education most broadly. In your time spent in higher education, do you feel like there is some culture that inhibits innovation and change, and apart from how we see it in other sectors?
I do. I mean, look, every organization, right, tries to sustain itself and gets locked in its own patterns. So in that sense, you're right. Higher ed is not necessarily unique. And I like the way you just phrased the question, which is, I think a lot of times higher ed takes a posture of, gee, if only those people on the outside would get us. If only those people understand what we do. If only those idiots understood the value, as opposed to saying, hey, what's in our control and what are the levers that we can pull and play with and so forth. And at least in my experience, a lot of institutions will say, gosh, why don't they like liberal arts? It's over, as opposed to asking the question, hey, maybe liberal arts is going to matter more in the future, but not the form factor through which we've done it. And we're going to have to do things to deliver the liberal arts a little bit differently than how we've done in the past. And at least in my experience, a lot of times people aren't willing to even entertain that side of the equation or think about what could we do differently that might not just deliver it differently, but actually deliver it better, perhaps, than how we've historically done it.
I attended a talk that Arthur Levine gave at the end of 2025, where he was saying, liberal arts, when it started, had a lot of practical application. You were learning Latin and other subjects, not because it was, quote, liberal arts, but it had practical application at the time. our mutual friend Rachel Tour, right, recommended that book that describe the novel that describes higher ed, from before World War One into the about 1950s, I think, maybe 1960. It's been a little scary to me, even sometimes when I look in at our own colleges or higher ed broadly, how much feels the same to 20, 30, 40 years ago. I like your thought about form, because everything else, form has changed so much in how we interact with society.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you just brought up another important point, I think, also in quoting our friend Arthur Levine, which is that um, I think higher ed often doesn't realize. I'm going to use a dirty word in higher ed on purpose, vocational. It's been historically, in the sense that the way we teach graduate students, certainly, but a lot of undergraduates in more selective institutions that have a research focus, is in effect to train them to, one day pursue this field of study and be an academic themselves, right? That's sort of the methodology that we have constructed around it. But we know most people don't go on to those careers in academia, and we know that most individuals are sort of exploring, looking for what is going to be my place in the world. There are ways to infuse the liberal arts that do have value. I'm a history major. I think there's a lot of value in them, but there are ways to do that are practical for the current time, I think, that can allow us to grapple with some really important questions internally of ourselves, questions of how we connect to others in society, questions of how we can make impact in society. And frankly, with AI changing, I think, a lot of that world of work, those humanities questions, ethics, history, things of that nature, I think are going to be more important, not less, to think about how do they fold back into, right, the choices we make in our careers, the products and programs and services that people design.
That does remind me, just this morning, I wasn't confident in an answer I got from one of the AI models yesterday. So I checked another one, and sure enough, got a different answer. Yeah, I got contradictory. I mean, that in itself is going to be a really interesting segue for people not just to assume. I guess it's no different than assuming whatever comes out in a Google search is, you know, the truth. But I think that's a good segue to your great concept of job to be done, right? So you're implying for undergrad, it's perhaps more vocational than we've accepted. Certainly at the graduate level, and our six colleges are heavily focused on. I think we have a clear idea of the job to be done. I'd like to cast it more broadly as getting someone to a rewarding life through a professional education. Is part of the issue that for higher education, the job to be done is really vague?
I think so. And I think they haven't spent the time not only to say what the mission or the job to be done is, but what it isn't, right? And to carve off things that, hey, that's a worthy pursuit, but that's not what we do. And let's be super clear about it to the students we want to serve, so that we don't take in a student who, is not going to find a match here, right? It's not going to help them make that progress, as you just described it, toward that better life. And I want to double click on something you said as well, because I think it's important when you think about the job to be done. People often obsess over the functional element of it. Oh, you're just trying to get a job that pays well and can pay off the debt, or makes it, the ROI makes sense. Sure, but a job to be done also has social and emotional dimensions to it, and those are often more important than the functional dimensions to people. And what I would say is, in the way you just said it, it's sort of, we get the job so that, right, all these other things can become true in our lives. I think that richness is part of this conversation too. And so just to say, every poll that you read says number one reason undergrads go to college these days is to get a good job. My reading of it through a jobs to be done lens is that is like the assumed number one thing you have to deliver. If you don't deliver that, game over. But that's not the only thing that they're asking for. And if you disaggregate the population by different jobs to be done and sort of what progress looks like for them, you get a lot of different textured answers in different parts of the society and higher ed landscape that institutions haven't leaned into nearly enough to say what's our part of this. Being a one size fits all solution, that's a recipe for cost increases and mission creep, and frankly watering down what you deliver.
And I jumped ahead, so maybe give you a moment to unpack the
Oh, what is
concept
the jobs to be
of
done?
jobs
Sure,
to be
for
done.
listeners. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So when we talk about the job to be done, we say it's the progress someone is trying to achieve in a struggling circumstance. So I want to get to something and I have some sort of struggle in my life. You hire, in effect, a product or service to help you get that job done. And uh, it started in the world of fast food where people said, what's the job to be done? People hire a milkshake for. And it turned out it wasn't just to have a dessert. It was actually to keep them occupied and filled them up during the morning commute to work. And it did the job better than bagels and donuts and things like that. But you didn't want to be seen consuming a milkshake right with other people. So you consumed it in your car as you were driving to work. So the same is true in higher ed, that these functional, social, emotional dimensions to some sort of struggling moment or circumstance in someone's life come together to help them make progress against something. And frankly, what we did, in choosing college, the book that we wrote, we basically looked at hundreds of people and why they had made the decision to enroll. The jobs to be done are not sort of how we frame them as colleges and universities. We call that the supply side language. When you ask individuals and you follow the dominoes that tip in their journey to enroll, it's a little bit, I won't say counterintuitive, but it's not the conversation we typically have in higher ed. Like they're like, I want to get into the best school for me. I don't even know what that means in most cases, right? They'll say, I want to take the next, step it up in my life. Like it's now or never. I got to do something different. This isn't good. My family's depending on me. I got to step it up. That's a totally different hiring criteria, if you will, for a college or university. And then frankly, I'll just name one other. There's a few others, but one other is help me do what's expected of me. These are people that are going not because they're excited about going, but because they're trying to satisfy, if you will, the expectations of others in their lives. And they think, this is just what I'm supposed to do. And it turns out those individuals who go to, fulfill someone else's expectations, 74% in our data set dropped out or transferred because they didn't, when it got tough, and college always gets tough at some point, they didn't know why they were there. And so most of them opted out at some point.
I think that's a fascinating lens because it illustrates a really profound disconnect in how a parent or a young person might be thinking about college and how colleges are talking about it. Uh, my kids are long past college graduation. My son went to Vanderbilt University. It was a very different experience than I had. I mean, my observation as a parent, a lot of drinking and a lot of focus on being a sports spectator,
Mm.
under the guise of being like a great university. Now he's become very successful professionally. And I think when people see Vanderbilt, that gives him some measure of respect or credibility. But it's so and my daughter went to Cornish College of the Arts, which I guess no longer exists, is part of your story about
Mm-hmm.
small colleges that
Consolidation.
will have consolidate. It's part of another university. So if I think about it, I guess I sent them with the idea. My wife, like, this will be a place where you'll be better off in 4 years uh, than you are today. You'll sort of be in that sense, the job did get done.
Yeah.
She majored in dance. I think largely she learned about discipline and, if you have to get up at 8 in the morning or 7 in the morning and work hard all day, but probably profoundly different in both cases than either Cornish or Vanderbilt would have talked about what they're up to.
Well, and you just pointed out something, right? Which is that and this again is not unique to higher ed, it may be more exacerbated in higher ed, which is to say most organizations, the way they tell the story and what they do for the people that they serve is very different from how the individuals perceive the job to be done. I'll give you one other story outside of higher ed, but M&M Mars a number of years ago had gotten worried that Milky Ways and Snickers bars were cannibalizing sales from each other because they just framed it as a candy bar, right? And they made certain assumptions around who bought candy bars. It turned out two totally different jobs to be done for Milky Way versus a Snickers. Milky Way was basically a dessert as a luxury item after an emotional event that you'd had in your life. So it would compete with things like a glass of wine or the ice cream, the whole tub of the ice cream, if you will. Whereas Snickers was basically, you didn't have time to eat a meal. You were on the run, grab and go, grab a Snickers. You're not you when you're hungry, right? And that's how that advertising campaign got born, out of that observation that these are very different jobs to be done that they're hired for. But you just put yourself in the seat of the executives at M&M Mars. They didn't see that, right? It's a chocolate candy bar. The same thing is true in higher ed, I think, is we tell ourselves, oh, it's about my classes, it's about the major, it's about this, it's about that. It's part of it, but to your point, it's not actually how the individual has come into the experience. And you raised another point too, which is the parents' job to be done is probably important in this equation as well.
I'm curious in your thoughts, just to go back to sports for a minute, because it's not the job to be done, except if you're going to be an athlete, but it's a big part of our society. How have you reflected on, because small colleges, will pivot to 100% discount to get football players because they have found it attracts male students. Of course, the economics don't often work because the athlete will leave at the drop of a hat for what they perceive. But what how do you see that? Because that's a whole other job that's getting done.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a great question, particularly at the current time, because I think for a set of D1 institutions, they're about to be priced out, right, of being able to continue to go down the current path they have of what I perceive to be the professionalization of college sports. Um, and I think for some, certainly D3 schools and so forth, to your point, they'll discount completely these student athletes as a way to try to get butts and seats in essence, right? It's a way to fill up your class and attract others to the college. And so I think the positive spin on it that I've read anyway is that for better or worse in our society, sports is one place where we create community. And a big part of the college experience, I think, is community and the social network and the individuals you connect with and develop and the memories and so forth that bind you across generations and time and so forth. And, when we wrote Job Moves, one of the striking things is every young person thinks you get a job by applying online, when the reality is 85% of jobs are filled by someone in your network. And so the implication is building community, meeting people, and frankly, your college and university is a great way to network. Alums love talking to current students at schools and so forth. And that's a great way to get to know each other. And I think sports is part of that binds itself, but we've maybe lost sight of the plot, right? As we've gone toward this sort of extreme version of it. And my own instinct is we'll probably have a few dozen schools that maybe even have to spin off their sports programs as for-profit affiliates in some way. And a bunch of others, I would hope that they would move much more toward a club sort of amateur type
Because I remember going to a game at a D3 school with very strong academics, a basketball game. It just looked like a bunch of guys who'd be better off, get together and play basketball. Why do we need the NCAA and a
I totally agree.
And it had a ridiculous feel. And on the flip side, so maybe Vanderbilt with its sports consumer culture was doing the right thing in building that community. I'm noting now that my son and all the alumni are so excited about their great sports success.
Football and basketball right now.
There's nothing about reminiscing about, the professors in the college, they're excited about, Vanderbilt winning uh, today. And I guess there's that term, the Power Five, with respect to the big sports. So let's move it over to the other D1 schools, the smaller, medium sized privates. Where does that focus need to be right now from your point of view? Because, if you're in the Power Five, you can be generating a lot of revenue from all sorts of ways. You can draw whatever student you want. You're getting all this external revenue. You predicted, along with Clayton Christensen, the demise of a quarter of smaller institutions, and I think in the last couple of years, you said that may have even been conservative. So, what's top of mind for you for what those institutions need to do now in 2026?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is to figure out, back to our original conversation around the job to be done and their mission, what makes us unique and special, and that is desired by individuals, right? And let's lean into that and frankly cut or find ways to enter into cooperative agreements with other universities to provide the services that are not core to who we are, right? And I think that means a lot of administrative overhead, trying to reduce that. I think it means probably fewer majors and focus in terms of what you're offering. And look, if you get the one student who's really passionate about, some course you don't offer, there are ways to do that in this day and age that don't require you to replicate all of the cost, right? Around, I was with a college recently, they'll have 5 students in a new major that they spun up because a faculty member thought, gee, my version of the business analytics of this, that, and is really important. And it's not to say it's unimportant, but it might not be at your particular college. And so I think focus is a really important thing, clarity around that. A lot of colleges that I observe, and I think you have this experience, they say the way that they're getting out of the current crunch, because the business models are absolutely collapsing around these folks, is they're going to grow out of it. They're going to start some new program. They're going to grow enrollment, whatever else. That's in the face of, they've been serving the 18 to 24-year-old demographic for decades. That demographic has been declining. The percent of those students that even want to go right away to a 4-year school has been declining. That's not a play, like a few folks, could probably grow out of it, but the majority of institutions, growth isn't going to be on the menu. And so I think hunkering down and figuring out what do we really do, and becoming more, more conviction around that mission, and actually a stronger, more resilient institution as a result is really important. And I think it'd be great for higher ed, more differentiated set of institutions that help students better make choices around where they want to enroll that matches more the progress they're looking to make. I think that'd be a great thing as well. But it's a big set of changes because the cost has just gotten so out of whack with what you have to then charge, right? And the number of students able to afford that for these tuition dependent schools in particular.
Yeah, stronger and more resilient is a good place. It's reassuring to me somewhat because I think most of our 6 colleges have a heavy graduate professional focus. So it's clear the job that needs, if you want to become an excellent clinical psychologist, come to us. We have some growth at the undergraduate level, which will be interesting to track because I think our promise is the same. We have no campuses where you can live or, buy food except from a vending machine. So you start a bachelor's degree or you never did, but you're on the way to a graduate program and a profession. And I'm hopeful that we can keep that really tight focus around that undergrad experience as well.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is that focus, that differentiation. There will be some institutions that grow amidst this, right? I mean, we're seeing it. Certainly, some of the larger ones are certainly growing in these times, even as a lot of other schools are struggling to fill seats and are shrinking. I think the ones that are growing are where the value proposition is clear. It's an in-demand value proposition, and they're not sort of getting distracted by shiny objects that they say, hey, no, another institution can go do that.
I'm interested in your take on this. The cutting cost things is really challenging. I've stuck to this script, right or wrong, when people say, if I join your system, how much will I save? And I say, nothing. But you'll take the pressure off of doing things that are not your forte, and you'll get a lot better for the same cost. So it's sort of promise coming in, your costs won't go up. And I do think that we've spread out these functions among all these small institutions, not just in higher ed, a lot of nonprofits outside of higher ed, and the jobs are just not well executed. You can't expect that one or two IT professionals, for example, are going to keep up with how IT has changed over the last couple of decades. But I think that's likely the same for marketing and enrollment and human resources and all of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with the point you're making. And it may very well be, if you can get off the growth of expenditures and just hold things flat. And then what you're describing is better relationships to actually up your level of expertise in these functional areas. I think that very well may be the way forward for a lot of places, right? And this is another place I think where higher ed is a little bit different from other sectors, is that it views a lot of things as fixed costs that it can't cut. And so a lot of things that someone would look at and say, well, that's variable, I can just cut it. Higher ed doesn't treat it that way. I think we could debate whether that should be the case, but it is what it is. I think if you can control the growth of those expenditures like you just described, that could be a really attractive value proposition over 5, 7, 10, 15 years as you look at your other institutions that are continuing to exceed the rate of inflation, which is just not a viable way forward, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's insufficient respect for these non-academic functions. I mean, right or wrong, we need them. We've been blessed to have, really seasoned HR leadership. So health insurance is such a out of control cost. I feel like our leader was able to moderate it to a great extent because he understood the levers to pull, how to negotiate with the health insurance company. And I pity, anyone trying to go at Blue Cross or Kaiser or Cigna on their own without that level of expertise.
Well, bring it back to the athletics for a moment. We were talking with another institution that's setting up a sports program at the moment, and because they came into a good deal of property for no cost, that has an arena on it and so forth. And it's like, okay, awesome. And the people that are now going to have to manage this and negotiate the contracts with the various providers that have been holding concerts and other things on these venues, this is not for the faint of heart. And you think you're going to strike a media deal around these are really complex, complicated things that require lots of expertise. And you want to find someone, and most colleges can't afford that someone. So I think the services that you just described, so that you can get someone with excellence do that well, is critical, because the flip side is you might not value it, but you certainly value it if you mess it up because of how it sets the institution back.
We have a phenomenal institution in Kansas, based in Wichita, Kansas Health Science University, and a rural hospital, offered a free location for our students. We realized free means we have to spend money to support the technology. Our students there, we have to make sure there's insurance, to cover.
Yeah, there's no free.
Yeah, there's no free. So, well, I'm confident I could talk to you for hours. However, I'm going to head us to the finish line and ask you kind of three things you would point small and medium-sized colleges to focus on in 2026 to get to a better place.
I would spend some time and say, what are we not? So a lot of times when you talk to a leader, you say, what are your priorities for the year? And they'll list 20 things. That means you have no priorities. So be really clear about what are the 1, 2, 3 things we're trying to execute on, and and what are we not going to do? So you can take things off the plate. And so that's number one. Number two, I would, I wouldn't bank on growth being the way out of the current challenges. Like, it is on the one hand, there's never been a better time to be in education of educating an adult because the need for more education is constant. And if you've built your entire model not around that graduate student that we were just talking, that you all have in your network, the undergraduate, it is what it is, right? You can't change that and grow your way out of it. So I think focus is going to be really important against that. And then the third thing I would say is, where in your business model can you create transformation? And that can be through partnership, that can be through creative ways of structuring the institution, but really think clearly about, like, what's our business model? What are the costs? What are the resources and processes that we use to deliver on that mission? And where are the opportunities for creativity and partnership with others that would allow us to be excellent without sacrificing the core of who we are? And if I think institutions do those three things, that'd be a pretty good place to start for 2026.
That's really good, and that's really tight. So what are we not? Don't count on growth. And is there a party or organization that in fact can transform? Well, Michael Horn, I'm really appreciative of all the time you spend thinking critically about education and for sharing your thoughts with our listenership today. Thanks for being here today.
I'm a huge fan of yours. Love reading your contributions, always on Forbes and so forth. So just thank you.
Thank you. And I want to encourage every listener to go and subscribe to Michael Horn's Substack, The Future of Education, where you're going to get a lot of great ideas about innovation, disruption, and the jobs we all need to do. Remember, collaboration changes what's possible, perhaps even opens the door for disruption and innovation. So thanks for tuning in to Radical Cooperation, and I'll see you next time.